This question right here is what could change your life as a beginner, as an artist, everything. The first chapter of this book has answered questions that I've never thought about asking myself or anyone more experienced as a beginner. And I think that if I knew the things that this book talks about in the first chapter when I first started painting, it would have just made my life so much easier as a beginner, and it would just take a lot of pressure off of painting. It would have given me more enjoyment of painting while also giving me a clear goal of where to move with my endeavor of learning to paint. The book's title is Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. You don't need to get the book. I'm just gonna go over the first chapter. I'm gonna read you the things that really stood out to me and why are they important, and I'm basically gonna be reacting to the passages. I'll be putting the passages here on the screen so you can read along or pause them if you want to read them yourself. This is all my interpretation of the book, so take what serves you, and what doesn't click with you or doesn't resonate, just forget about it. I mean, I'm just another person in the internet sharing what inspired them of somebody else that, you know, wrote something that's truly amazing. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get started. This question right here is what could change your life as a beginner, as an artist, everything. How to approach painting. Have you ever really asked yourself that? When I think about approaching painting, I'm thinking about the painting process of like, you do your sketching, you do then your maybe value studies, you like figure out your composition, and like that's an art process. But what he's really talking about is like the whole view about painting itself, and not just painting, but the art of painting. Here's where everything started to get very interesting. The art of painting cannot be taught and therefore cannot be learned. What? Only certain means can be discussed. The only way to study is to practice. Okay, that I got a little bit ahead of myself, but this is the art of painting. This is not talking about the fundamentals. This is not talking about the principles like composition, values, color, blah, 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 all that stuff. He's literally talking about the part of painting that is the art, and we'll get more into it later. Some of the things here got a bit controversial or contradictory in my opinion, but that could just be my understanding of the passages. Now, I already said the only way to study is to practice, and that's like a big revelation because everybody's looking for the magic bullet of like, how can I get better in like 30 days? It's just painting. You just have to practice. Of course, deliberate practice is better, but there's no way around it. You just have to practice. And he goes even into more detail later, and I'll just continue from there. And that any good teacher can point out certain intellectual or technical makings, certain helps that will give a fulcrum to the lever of practice. So yes, this is just saying that a teacher will only be able to teach you the technical stuff, but will not be able to teach you the art part. And they can certainly point out of like things that you can improve on your technical side, but that doesn't mean that you're improving on your art side. See where this is going? And now he talks about what this book is aiming to do. In this book, the endeavor is to present to the student of landscape painting a few logical and therefore teachable aids that must underlie even the most amateurish approach towards achievement in this art, or towards an appreciation of the technical difficulties involved in its creation. This is really good because he's basically saying that technique can only take you so far. But here comes the controversy. Here's where I started to get really confused, and I had to read this many times. No one can teach art. No one can give a singer a glorious voice. In painting, there is no excuse for poor technical performance. Just because he says like technique is not going to take you so far, that doesn't mean that you don't need technique and that technique is not useful. He actually goes into saying, in painting, we're apt to be very forgiving of poor technical performance. So here he starts sounding very strict about like every artist needs to be just so technically gifted, or like you're just not allowed to make mistakes technically. But now he goes on to another thing. In good art, the results do not have to be explained. As a matter of fact, there's but one kind of art, and that is good art. And this actually was like, oh, I felt like he was being like super strict. And actually he says, there is no comfortable halfway station. It is either fine or it's not art. And I was like, holy crap, that sounds so strict, because that made me feel really bad about like how little technical consistency I have in my work. And then he goes on to saying, but art is a thing so much of the imagination, of the soul, that is difficult to descend to fundamentals of technique and yet make it plain to the student that these are but means and not an end in themselves. Underlying principles or fundamentals should be so hidden away by the beauty that they are eventually to support that it would require much digging to disclose them. And this is where it gets interesting. Even though it sounded very contradictory, now he's sounding a little bit more reasonable, and is saying that your technical ability should not be an obstacle for you to be able to achieve something beautiful. And the beauty of it is not because of the technical side, it's because of your expression. And I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but isn't that cool? And here's where he encourages the beginner, and we are the beginners, right? We're the amateur artists. I want him to realize clearly that these ideas or rules are only beginnings. They are means, and I want to warn him against consider them as ends. I think this was one of the things that I read and I was like, holy crap, I can breathe now. Because I always feel bad about my poor grasp of fundamentals or my technical abilities, but then with this is like saying, yeah, you're not good at them, but that doesn't make you a bad artist. Like, it just means that you have to work on that stuff. And how do you work on it? How do you study those things? You just practice. He goes on to saying like what happens nowadays, or it still happens nowadays, is we have technically over-equipped and overloaded the poor beginner. We have spent so much time preparing a student that when he is prepared, he was spent. This right here, for me, was gold. Saying, and that's the funny thing that I feel like it's contradictory, because he's also saying like, you're not allowed to have poor technical performance, yet he's also saying don't learn everything right away, which I found to be very interesting, that he's basically contradicting himself, but at the same time he's not. So that begs the question of like, how much should you learn, how much time should you spend on each given like fundamental, like composition, values, color, everything like that. I think he kind of answers that, but he also gives you a more like direct, he gives a very good pointer as to what to really focus on. How shall we see nature with a painter's eyes and not merely as a tourist? The word see does not mean, in this instance, mere visual correctness. This never in itself produced a work of art. A snapshot is a correct rendition of physical fact. Sharply focused, it will show numberless grass upon the ground. It can in fact render these so that we can see nothing else upon the print. In the actual form of mass upon which the grass occurs, it does not suggest, nor does it convey nature's subtle change of color changes or color flow. But most of all, the camera does not have an idea about the object reflected upon its lens. It does not feel anything and will render one thing as well as another. When we think about technical performance, when we think about being good at art, we think about how capable are we to render things to a real degree, if that makes sense. So how realistic can you make something? I know I certainly sometimes do that myself. And by sometimes I mean definitely all of the times. And here is he's hinting at the beginner, or at me, or at you, that is not the point of the art of painting. It is not rendition. It is the idea that you extract from the moment that you looked at the landscape or at your subject and you felt something. And he goes more into it, and I'll read the next thing. This idea or thrill is the unteachable part of all art. It must be intrinsic in the student. Oh yeah, listen to this. Listen to this. If anything from this video is worth listening to, is this right here. It is presupposed that anyone taking up any of the arts has this inherent sensitiveness to beauty. With this native gift, he can proceed to apply the process of reducing his material to its simplest denomination, eliminating all the non-essentials and leaving only the simplified elements which to create and express. This right here is the most important thing that I want you as an artist to think or to believe and like really feel it within you. What he's saying right here is that just the fact that you have taken up art or wanting to learn how to paint, it already says something about you, that you have a special lens or a special way to see the world, that you see some beauty that other people would just like go by and like never look at it. And just the fact that you would sit down and paint this, give that moment attention to whatever subject it is. It could be a landscape, it could be a portrait, it could be a can of beans, whatever it is, that in itself is the real purpose of art. And now he goes on and says, by diligent practice with an eye and hand, he must master the fingering of the keyboard. So technical deficiencies at least will not stand between him and expression. And when one has thus arrived at the point where he can play, let him not mistake this ability or dexterity for the end or final expression. Basically saying, just because you can render something to perfection, that does not mean that you're a complete artist. If you're not taking care of that one bit of like having the idea and trying to really render that beauty that you saw within a moment in life. Does this making any sense? Let me know in the comments. I know it's a lot, but it's so good, and I really wanted to share with you. Let the student realize at once that there is no method or style which he can become a fine painter. I know that there's a lot of people trying to think about, how do I develop my style? Here's the answer. You can't copy any style. You can't copy it. You have your own style, just like you have your handwriting, and that's exactly what he says right here. Style or method in painting is like your personal handwriting. Like, I mean, I can try to paint like Joseph Svukvik or Andy Evenson or Oliver Pyle or whoever, but that's not the way I paint, right? Sure, it's good to understand it, but like, you're never gonna develop that style because that is not you. So we're gonna move on. I have often said that almost all students can paint well enough at the end of a season to produce a work of art. The work of art, however, is usually slower in forthcoming. The craft of painting can sometimes be acquired in a year or two, but that is but one of the means. So here you go. You don't need to spend 10 years, I don't know, painting value studies or whatever. You only need a year or two to grasp the fundamentals, to understand what you need to do, what you need to look for. You don't need to master them per se. Just the fact that you understand them is enough. And also the fact that you know how to apply them and when to, not apply them, if that's how you want to express something that you saw or anything like that. Now we're gonna talk about more like how we all begin as beginners, and he has like some more useful things. The beginner in paintings begins by copying nature in all literalness, leaving nothing out and putting nothing in. Very important. He makes it look like the place or person or thing. By and by he will learn to omit the superfluous and to grasp the essential and arrange them into a more powerful and significant whole. It is wonderful to know that these essentials will be essential to him only, and another man will choose another group of essentials out of the same fountain of inspiration. We usually think like, oh, I'm just copying somebody else's work, or I'm doing the same thing as somebody else. But how you see and how I see that same scene is completely different, and that's what's beautiful about art. And here's more things about the whole copying. It is not enough even for our beginnings that we strain to copy color and form as we find them. We may succeed in doing so in a superficial way and yet not get the true sense, so the true sense of the landscape. You could copy something as exactly as it is with the colors exactly in the value, but you would still not feel anything about it, like the beauty of it, the real beauty would not be there, right? And then he talks about something very important, and I think that's a term that I might be using in the future, landscape sense. And what he means by that is something apart from beauty or color relation or form relation. He means the float of a cloud, the lightness of it, the filmy, airy thing that it is, the weight of the ground, its solid, massive form, the roll of the hills, the growth and reach of the trees, each a graceful, personal, individual thing. This is very interesting because when have you really thought about, when you're painting a cloud, to make it fluffy, light, and you know, that you can feel that? And that is a very, very nice cue to know how to paint something. Here he goes on about a very good controversial topic that we still have learned, you know, like paint like a child, or you have to be so meticulous and like so technically perfect to make a masterpiece. And he actually expresses how mere knowledge can never create a masterpiece, but neither can childish simplicity. The simplicity thesis, brought to a logical conclusion, would resolve that the youngest child would be the best artist. Isn't that right? If so, what then is the use of living, thinking, and experimenting? It is true that all great works of art are simple, as child's work, but the simplicity in them is not born of ignorance. We feel that the looseness, the playfulness of somebody's painting kind of comes from just being expressive. But when it's deliberate, of like knowing what you're trying to do, and this is the whole dance that he's talking about, of like being technically good and like knowing when to break those rules for the technical part, or your technical ability to serve your expressiveness. And now he goes on to talking about the whole other part of that we've been talking about, that art is the feeling that you get from the landscape. And he says, but if mere feeling or sensitiveness to beauty would produce a work of art, artists would be legion. Such is not our fortune. Which is true. Like, if everybody that was an artist or that picked up a brush and felt something and was able to just out of pure that be able to produce great work, then there will be tons of really great artists, you included. And now he starts to kind of condense everything that we have been talking about. So the first one is, it is difficult to go forward, but the backward slide comes with no effort. When effort is relaxed, we retrogress whether we will or not. All this does not mean that by mere hard work or merely growing old, one can become anything desired. Everybody's thinking like, oh, I really have to work hard and that's just gonna make me a better painter, or oh, I'm just gonna be playful and like not care about the fundamentals and I will like at some point become better. This is basically saying that's not how it works. If every single time that you paint, there has to be effort in the wanting to improve or the wanting to express yourself. And this is a thing to balance, right? Because you have to look at yourself and think, why am I doing this as an artist, right? Do I want to sell my art? Do I want to become a great artist? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's up to you to decide. But I think that he's talking to the people that really, really want to become the best artists that they can possibly be. The ones that really want to harness that instinctive sensitiveness to beauty. For me, I would balance it because I'm not looking to live off my art, at least not at this moment. And I don't want to put that pressure on myself. And I've heard from some of you in the comments that you do the same. You don't want to like sell your art. You don't want to learn to paint properly because you just want to be playful, and that's perfectly fine. This is just really about where in your life you are with your art and what it represents for you. And here is a very like similar quote to what Picasso said. The true artist works rather in gusts of effort and in smaller gusts of apparent lassitude. He's not lying about waiting for some inspiration. He is in the travel, you know how to read this, I'm sorry, of the dreamer entering into expression. I think Picasso said, I don't wait for inspiration, I just let it find me working, or something like that. Basically the same thing, right? And now he goes on and on about like the method, like the balance between the scientific and like the dreamy feely thing. Is like an artist must neither be too dreamy nor too mathematical. He must dream and he must paint. I really like that, he must paint, like that's the scientific practice, you know. And now we're really starting to close into things, and here he's basically answering a question that he always gets, which is, what do you think about modern art? Picture is a work of art not because it is modern nor because it is ancient, but because it is a sincere expression of the human feeling. There you go. That is what art is. And then he talks about whatever a good new thing possesses becomes part of our steady, slow growth. Slow growth. That is, I underlined that twice because I was like, it is slow. It is not as fast as like day and night. All things cannot serve forever, nor be discarded too hastily. So we can always learn from the old masters. We also shouldn't say like, that's like this book. This book is quite old. This book was published in 1973. It is old, and none of the things that he's talking about this can be discarded yet, or too hastily, as they say. Now, the last thing, it is my hope that in this book, the student may find a guide to the technical know-how that will serve him well in his own search of expressiveness and creativeness. I mean, what a freaking chapter. What a freaking book, to be honest. Let me know what you think about all these verses. I know that it was a lot. I hope that you were able to extract something good about it. I hope that you were able to see why I felt like this was worth sharing. You don't need to buy the book. I haven't read the whole thing. There is definitely good things about the book. I just don't want everybody to just go and buy the book just because it's mentioned in the video. The poor author is not gonna get any money from that, right? So you don't need to go buy the book. But if you want to buy the book, I'll leave the link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that this was helpful, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.